It wasn't necessary to wait for the official election results to be announced to know the outcome, as a jubilant President Nicolas Maduro made amply clear.
We had the patience, the wisdom to wait for this hour, to wait for this day, to get rid of that nefarious National Assembly that the opposition used to bring the plague of sanctions onto Venezuela. Now with this vote, we will have justice.
Venezuela's mainstream opposition boycotted the Legislative Assembly poll, which they say lacked the minimum conditions of a fair and free election. The pro-government Supreme Court had taken over 3 of the 4 principal opposition parties, appointing new leaders who are accused of being pawns of Maduro. In addition, the court appointed a new electoral council, also loyal to the government. And there were no independent observers, only staunch supporters like former Bolivian President Evo Morales. Despite threats to withhold subsidized food boxes to those who didn't vote, the turnout was poor.
In this voting center in the Macuto district, there is normally a lot of people when there's an election. Today, what you have is a fraud in our country, which has been clearly rejected.
Maduro's foreign allies like Russia, China, and Iran will likely applaud the elections, which could give their commercial agreements with Venezuela a stronger legal framework with which to circumvent U.S. and European sanctions. But the United States, the EU, and many Latin American countries say they won't recognize the new parliament. Maduro plans to ask the new assembly to appoint a special commission to try enemies of the state, especially opposition leader Juan Guaidó. But that could bring on more international reprisals.
I think it would be better for Maduro to leave Guaidó alone and play cat and mouse with him. Grab him by the tail and let him go. What will the world see? An opposition leader who once had 61% support and now has half of that and is losing more by the day.
Guaidó has been recognized as Venezuela's interim president by more than 50 countries, but his legitimacy has rested on being the elected leader of the National Assembly. Come January, when the new legislature is sworn in, the opposition will lose the only state institution it controlled, destroying what critics regard as the last remnant of democracy in Venezuela. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera.
Phil Gunson is the senior analyst for the Andes region at the International Crisis Group. He says after this vote, Venezuela's opposition will need a new strategy to convince voters.
Guaidó and the opposition leadership have said that they will continue to be the legitimate National Assembly because they don't recognize this election either. And they expect governments to continue to recognize Guaidó as the president. I think that recognition is likely to dwindle over time because, of course, politics is about power. And the power in this country is held by Maduro, not by Guaidó, who doesn't even have the keys to his own office. I think it's going to be a question of the opposition going back to the drawing board, really, and devising a new strategy. I think we have to start by recognizing that most people in Venezuela are concerned about putting food on the table and issues like the pandemic. They're not convinced the government or Guaidó and his so-called interim government really have much to say about the conditions that they face, which are conditions of extreme poverty, conditions of raging epidemics, not just COVID-19, a collapsing health service, collapsing infrastructure all around. And so that there's very little interest in this election, and there's going to be little interest, I think, within Venezuela for the referendum too. Of course, in the case of this referendum, there will be the possibility of people voting remotely via internet from abroad, where about 5 million Venezuelans are currently living in exile.